I'm Scott Schiff, along with William Swig, and this is the Ayn Rand Fan Club. William, how are you today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good, good. We've got a big debate coming up. We're actually going to tackle the open-closed debate, whether objectivism is an open or closed philosophy. So I just want to add a disclaimer at the beginning. I see the open-closed debate as part of a litany of charges that were used to drum David Kelley out of the objectivist movement. And so I do see it in that context. It's probably the most defensible of all the charges that were made from the ARI, Ayn Rand Institute side. So I just, that is part of the context to me. And so I just, that being said, I'm going to try to stick as much to the open-closed piece as possible. So the open-closed idea was first brought up in 1989 by David Kelley in his article, A Question of Sanction. And it was within the context of defending his decision to speak to libertarians and how he wasn't actually sanctioning evil by doing so. Kelley said, Ayn Rand left us a magnificent system of ideas, but it is not a closed system. It is a powerful engine of integration. Let us not starve it of fuel by shutting our minds to what is good in other approaches. Let us test our ideas in open debate. If we are right, we have nothing to fear. If we are wrong, we have something to learn. Above all, let us encourage independent thought among ourselves. Let us welcome dissent and the restless ways of the explorers among us. 9 out of 10 new ideas will be mistakes, but the 10th will let in the light. So that's how Kelley framed it. Now, Leonard Peikoff, for his part, responded in fact and value. And Peikoff says, in his last paragraph, Kelley states that Ayn Rand's philosophy, though magnificent, is not a closed system. Yes, it is, he says. Philosophy, as Ayn Rand often observed, deals with only the kinds of issues available to men in any era. It does not change with the growth of human knowledge, since it is the base and precondition of that growth. Every philosophy, by the nature of the subject, is immutable. But then Peikoff continues, new implications, applications, integrations can always be discovered, but the essence of the system, its fundamental principles and their consequences in every branch, are laid down once and for all by the philosophy's author. So the new implications, applications, and integrations are what I think Kelley means by saying the philosophy is open.
In Truth and Toleration, Kelley also mentions discoveries. So I think that what Kelley means is also the discoveries that someone might make within objectivism. So it's a little more than implications, applications, and integrations.
Yeah, I'm fine with that broader interpretation. I'll grant you that. Now, I think also it's important to make a distinction at the beginning between open objectivism and rather modified objectivism, because the closed side has often accused David Kelley of changing or modifying objectivism, but in reality, he's saying he has a different starting point for what is the core philosophy. And within that core philosophy, he's not advocating modifying any of those essential principles.
So here I have a question, because I come from the closed philosophy side, even though we're going to get to the idea that these are metaphors, open and closed are metaphors, right, which is something Kelley and Onkar Ghate both point out. And we'll get to that later. But I have a question for the open objectivist people who say that they're not advocating modifying the essential principles, because in Truth and Toleration, Kelley says that the basic principles could be reformulated within a school of thought. So how do you respond to that idea?
Well, I guess, my question is, what are some of the fundamentals that he's talking about? Because that wasn't my reading of Truth and Toleration.
Okay, well, in Truth and Toleration, I'll quote, he says, in an open philosophy, members of the school may differ among themselves over many issues within the framework of the basic principles they accept.
Right,
Those issues,
within that framework. Then outside of that, there are going to be things they disagree about.
no, but then he says, those issues include a vast array of detailed questions in every area of philosophy, as well as the proper formulation of the basic principles themselves and their interrelationships. So it seems like he's not just talking about, the more secondary principles, but the basic principles themselves can be reformulated.
Well, that goes back to kind of the objection against libertarians that Peikoff and some objectivists use, that because they come to the right conclusion the wrong way, it's actually less true the way they see it. And in that same way, it sounds like Kelley is saying, yes, even within the basic principles, how we derive them is still worth further study.
But not just how we derive them. He's saying they can be reformulated. So basically, that means rewritten, right?
I mean, I've seen examples of Ayn Rand Institute people reformulating her ideas to just, instead of the focus on egoism, they just present it as, just trying to live the best life you can. Is that a modification?
It would be a modification of her words. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, can we only use her words in that exact formulation?
Well, I don't think he means just rewording, but like changing the formula.
What is it that he says that makes you think he's talking about reformulating? It's just saying that, I mean, because even Kelley or even Peikoff mentions reformulations.
Well, because of what Kelley says, as well as the proper formulation. So he's assuming it's improper. So if Rand had an improper formulation, then, it would be okay to reformulate it, change it.
I think he's saying that, reality is the ultimate arbiter, even above Ayn Rand.
Well, that's true. And I agree with that. And I think that's what we'll get to later. And that's the problem with the metaphors, open and closed, is it doesn't really pinpoint what we're talking about. I think we'll get to that later.
Right. And I'm going to switch to a slide here. And then David Kelley addresses the modified objectivism issue as well, in saying, the implication of everything I've said is that if objectivism is to be regarded as a philosophy rather than a body of dogma, it cannot be defined in the manner Peikoff demands. The alternative is not, as he claims, the freedom to rewrite objectivism as one wishes. The alternative is to define it objectively.
So here we encounter the problem I see as the difference between defining and describing something. So it seems like on one hand, you have David Kelley describing the philosophy in the terms of like essential principles. And then on the other hand, you have Leonard Peikoff saying, defining objectivism as the philosophy of Ayn Rand. So they're doing like two different things.
I think that may be true. If anything, a description's more detailed than a quick definition. And Peikoff's is vague because, we need to differentiate between things Ayn Rand said, more casually versus what is the philosophy itself.
Yes, but we also need to decide whether what we're dealing with. What is the referent in reality that we're dealing with? And because a definition is supposed to differentiate something from everything else. And there are two different types of nouns, and there's common nouns and there's proper nouns. So are we dealing with objectivism as a common noun as like a class of things or as a proper noun, as a specific thing?
Yeah, maybe we should start with the people telling people they're not a real objectivist over it and get their view. I do want to just back up for just a moment because we're going to go to this a few times, but to his credit, Onkar Ghate did a 9-minute video segment on the open-closed question, and he actually breaks it down into 3 separate issues. And let's hear what he has to say.
Often be put now as A or I is closed, or it holds the line that objectivism is closed or something. And open closed are metaphors. And I actually think that it's a package deal here. You need to distinguish elements and understand. So, and you can give different answers to these elements of what I think open and closed as metaphors are trying to more, if we put it more literally, capture. And I put it this, I make at least these 3 distinctions.
And we're going to break down those 3 issues. The first one is the one we've already been getting into, and the most common, about, just whether or not what the philosophy covers.
If you ask, is objectivism open or closed? Part of what we talked about last time is that objectivism is Ayn Rand's philosophical theory or philosophical system. You could think of it as its integration of some philosophical theories, but it's a philosophical system. It's the name she gave to her philosophical system. And in that sense, it closes when she dies or retires and stops further delineating or defining the system.
So even here, Onkar also calls objectivism Ayn Rand's philosophical system, but he still doesn't define which parts that includes. I mean, when saying it's complete because she died, that doesn't mean there's nothing to be added to philosophical knowledge. As Kelley points out, she didn't write much about propositions, an issue that he says is essential for a viable theory of truth. Also, they had to bring David Harriman in because her theory, she was missing a theory of induction.
Let me first start with the issue of the metaphor, because I agree here with Onkar. I think that open and closed are metaphors, and this might be the most crucial issue to deal with in actually describing or defining what we mean by open and closed. And I've been doing a lot of thought about it. And I think what is actually happening is open refers to a common noun and closed refers to a proper noun. So you basically have people talking past each other. David Kelley's trying to describe, I think, a class of objectivist philosophies, one of which would be Rand's philosophy, and another would be Kelley's philosophy, and another would be Peikoff's philosophy, except that Kelley's and Peikoff's philosophies include much or all of Ayn Rand's philosophy. So, and then Peikoff would have his own applications of it or discoveries, and then Kelley would have his own applications and discoveries.
So every philosophy is just one person?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is it's Onkar defines it as the Ayn Rand's philosophic system, which I agree with. I think that Ayn Rand gave a name to her philosophy, her personal philosophy, and that name she called objectivism. Now, whether she was correct or wrong to do that is another question. But I mean, I think anyone's entitled to give a name to their personal philosophy. But normally we end up referring to someone's personal philosophy by their last name. So you have, or their first name. You have Aristotelianism for Aristotle's philosophy. You have Platonism for Plato's philosophy. You have Kantianism for Kant's philosophy. And I think ultimately we'll just have Randianism or Randian philosophy for Rand's philosophy.
So as far as you're concerned, was objectivism supposed to be a common or a proper noun?
Proper noun. I think that Ayn Rand's intent was for it to be a proper noun referring to her personal philosophy. And I think if you go through everything she said about it, that bears out, that you can prove that that's what she meant. Obviously, I don't think she meant that her objectivism was supposed to refer to a whole class of objectivist philosophies. It was just her philosophy that she came up with.
I just don't, I think the point is that both Kelley and Peikoff would say they are in agreement with enough of what they consider to be fundamental principles to say that, just partially for giving credit to say that, yes, what identifies me is that I am in agreement with the fundamentals of objectivism. I just think we have to make a distinction between the primary principles of Rand's philosophy, her own theories and her views on a wide range of subjects, including those that touch on philosophical issues.
Yeah, I think that's an important task, and it's one that both Kelley and Peikoff have attempted. Peikoff wrote a whole book trying to describe what the essential fundamental aspects of objectivism are. In OPAR, he didn't include everything Rand ever said. He tried to boil it down to the structure of the system, which includes all the arguments and interrelationships between the principles. And then Kelley obviously did something similar with his books and his lectures.
Yeah, I just think, even within what Peikoff did, he said this is not objectivism. So, and I know he was trying to make that distinction.
Right, because Peikoff is arguing that Kelley repudiated fundamental principles, which is a whole nother topic, which we could get into some other time. I don't really want to try to untangle that mess right now.
Yeah, but this goes back to why even use open and closed in the first place if they're just metaphors, and why keep using it. But again, that's a bit outside the scope of the discussion. But like Rand said, she couldn't vote for a female president, for example. Is that part of objectivism?
I would not include that, and that's not in OPAR. So I don't even think Peikoff included that. That was her personal application of a psychological principle. She actually, in About a Woman President, she actually says the primary issue here is psychological. So she was applying her view of, masculinity and femininity to the idea of a woman president. So I don't think that's part of objectivism.
I just think if everything, if not everything Rand said is objectivism, there's got to be some way to distinguish, and you can say use OPAR, but, because he said that isn't objectivism, I'm just not sure there's as much of a basis. Regarding
OPAR, I think that is Peikoff's interpretation of objectivism. So it's not strictly objectivism, but it's his view of what is the fundamental structure of objectivism and its arguments. But it's based on a lecture series that Ayn Rand did approve of in her lifetime. So we could go back to the lecture series that Peikoff gave in the 70s and look at that as more of an authoritative version of her philosophy. But but she said I think it was the Objectivist, in one of the articles she wrote, like a statement of policy or something like that, she said that until she writes her own book on the system of objectivism, Leonard Peikoff's articles or lectures are the closest thing there is to it.
I don't know if that's an exact quote. I listened to those 76 lectures years ago. They're good, and I respect Peikoff for them, though he himself says that OPAR made formulations that were immeasurably superior to the 76 lectures. I don't know if those also count as reformulations. Be that as it may, we have different views on what you have to, on what are the fundamental principles. You can say, do you agree with every line in Onkar? Or, you can use something about, what Ayn Rand said, describing her philosophy. Let's go to that slide.
So Ayn Rand said, my philosophy, objectivism, holds that reality exists as an objective absolute. Facts are facts, independent of man's feelings, wishes, hopes, or fears. Reason, the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses, is man's only means of perceiving reality, his only source of knowledge, his only, his only guide to action, and his basic means of survival. Every man is an end in himself, not the means to the ends of others. He must exist for his own sake, neither sacrificing himself to others nor sacrificing others to himself. The pursuit of his own rational self-interest and of his own happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. The ideal political economic system is laissez-faire capitalism. It is a system where men deal with one another not as victims and executioners, nor as masters and slaves, but as traders by free voluntary exchange to mutual benefit. It is a system where no man may obtain any values from others by resorting to physical force, and no man may initiate the use of physical force against others.
That's not a bad summary. I just think it, if anything, Kelley has more than that on his list of what it means to be an objectivist.
Yeah, so there's, in my view, many different ways to describe the philosophy of objectivism. Like we saw there, Rand goes into detail describing it literally. And then on some occasions, she describes it more poetically or figuratively as the concept of man as a heroic being, and all of that. So I think really what we're dealing with are different descriptions of the same thing. And you can describe the same thing in many different ways. And it doesn't mean that one description is wrong and one is right. That depends on whether
within the context of, sorry, go ahead.
Whether a description is right or wrong depends on whether it's accurate and, referring to something that's true.
That's true, but it also speaks to saying, oh, you have a different list, go ahead and get out of my movement. But
I'm not sure that's exactly what was being said. I think there's more to Peikoff's argument than that.
Yes, there's many more pages. I just think one of the things that Kelley says is that even within that list, that doesn't even totally do her justice to show what makes her different from other philosophers. And I think we need something more than that, but obviously less than every word she wrote or said.
True. Well, actually, I might disagree, because I think there are only a handful of things that differentiate her from every other system. I think that what we're looking at is a philosophy that is based on Aristotle and perhaps some other, maybe some Nietzsche or some other aspects of different philosophies. So it's not like Rand popped out of from nowhere. It's a she is standing on the shoulders of giants, namely Aristotle. So much of objectivism is based on Aristotelian principles. And she would agree with that, because she said that Aristotle was the primary inspiration for her. So her philosophy is not distinctive from Aristotle in the sense that she uses much of Aristotle's metaphysics and epistemology. But she's distinctive, I think, primarily in ethics and also somewhat in epistemology, where she came up with a view of concept formation.
Right. Well, even within metaphysics, I mean, there are original things about the primacy of existence and just, call them formulations that she made, but they are crucial. And Kelley would agree with you that, that what she did in morality and using egoism to put their cards on the table, he says, to say altruism is wrong and that self-sacrifice is a perversion of ethics. And so, yes, that is unique. I happen to.
Yeah, I agree. I think that she had a lot of unique things to say in ethics, and she wrote a whole book on her intro to epistemology as well. So I think that's where she shined, but you're also right that she did some slight tweaking of metaphysical principles. And I think that she made some insights there, but I don't think it was revolutionary in the way that, Aristotle was revolutionary in that regard, because Aristotle was differentiating vastly from Plato.
Well, that view itself could get you jumped out of the movement.
How's that?
Well, by saying that Ayn Rand's not that original.
Not in metaphysics.
Well, I guess you're acknowledging that she's original in other areas, but even Kelley acknowledges that what she did in all branches have some originality. But I want to go back to a slide that he has that I think is really relevant here to the open-close debate. Kelley says, a body of principles does not exist apart from the individual minds who grasp them. Knowledge presupposes a knower. An ism requires an ist. A philosophy defines a school of thought, a category of thinkers who subscribe to the same principles. Only because there are adherents that we're talking about defining a philosophy at all.
Yeah, he says that a philosophy is a body of principles, and I also see that as a metaphor, because a body, there isn't really a body of principles, there's a set of principles, or like a collection of principles. And so he's still using metaphor, and I think that's still a problem, because we need to get away from metaphorical senses of philosophy. We need to try to define it literally. And a system of thought or system of ideas, that seems closer to a literal view of it, but I'm not even sure that is as literal as we can be.
Sure. Well, just to add on, because in The Art of Nonfiction, Ayn Rand said, and I'll pull up the slide, and this is Rand, first, you need to grasp that there is no such thing as objectivism or any other philosophy. Philosophy is the study of the fundamental nature of reality. Fundamental refers to a principle or truth which is present in a vast number of concretes. To say something is fundamental means that many other truths depend on it.
I think she was a little mistaken by saying there's no such thing as objectivism. That's not true. Obviously, there is a thing that's objectivism. Otherwise, what are we advocating? There is something that is objectivism. I think it's a system of ideas, like it's a philosophy. But the question is, where does it exist? How does it exist? And I think that it's something that exists in the form now as a representation of Rand's philosophy. So we have her works. Nobody can read her mind, but she can write down what she thinks, on paper, and then that represents her system. So we have to look at what she wrote and try to interpret what was going on in her mind. So that's
right. And to differentiate the fundamentals from the non-fundamentals.
Correct. You want to know what is the essence, what is the critical aspect of the philosophy or aspects and how they relate to each other. And it's important to understanding what the philosophy is or what her philosophy was.
Right. I happen to think the burden to provide a standard is on David Kelley because he declared it open. He must offer what he thinks are the fundamental principles.
Yeah, and I think he's done that.
Yeah, he did give us such a list 30 years ago. And he said they're not considered to be, articles of faith, but what he sees as primary in making her ideas unique, which is what we're trying to get to. I think it's, all the more impressive because he derived these on his own before Opar was published.
Right, but not before the lecture series that Peikoff gave.
That's true. That's true. But again, he said those the Opar formulations were immeasurably superior. And so if some of these don't look quite the way you're used to, it's because, Opar hadn't even been written for Kelley to try to crib the notes or anything.
Well, I consider Kelley an original thinker, so I don't see why he would go to Peikoff. I'm sure he went to Rand, the sources.
Absolutely. But it speaks to his power as an original thinker that he was able to put these together before Opar even came out. Hey, I like the guy. What can I say? All right, let's see what we got here. So reality is objective. Facts is absolutes. He says the first two are basically Aristotelian, like you do. The axiom of existence being the primary metaphysical fact. Number 4 is her principle of the primacy of existence, which denies that reality is malleable by consciousness. The laws of identity and causality as axioms. The concept of objectivity, rejecting the intrinsicist versus the subjectivist dichotomy. Then just reason being the faculty of concepts. Reason is a volitional faculty. Values are rooted in the phenomenon of life. Since reason is our basic means of survival, the primary virtue is rationality. Reason is volitional. Reason is a faculty of the individual. Productive work, the creation of value, is our basic means of dealing with reality. There's a rejection of altruism and the mind-body dichotomy. Also, that the individual must be protected by rights. Individual rights provide the moral basis of capitalism, and that the government must be strictly limited into just doing protection of rights and acting within objective law. So those are 17 that I think are, more of a tight requirement than she gave in her short summary.
Yeah, but he's trying to do a fuller description. She was trying to give the briefest outline. I don't think it's fair to say because Rand excluded some things that she didn't consider it important to her philosophy. Right. She was just trying to boil things down to the basics, that she could communicate to people who don't really understand philosophy.
Yeah, Kelley concedes that other things are true that she talked about, and they enhance many of the fundamentals. But if someone disagrees with seeing Kant as, the most evil person in history, for example, that it's not primary in the way the items in his list are. The bottom line to me is that if someone tells you they accept all of those premises, but has issues with, tabula rasa, for example, or the Kant thing, and your reaction is to respond, "You're not an objectivist," then to me, you're not a moralist, as Leonard Peikoff actually encourages people to be, but instead you're a moralizing, ninny nitpicker who's more focused on finding excuses to exclude the imperfect.
Well, again, I would just point out that Peikoff made more of an argument in fact and value than just what you're saying. He tried to argue that Kelley repudiated fundamental principles. So
how did he do that?
Well, I'm not going to debate it now, but we can we can debate it some other time.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the more important, relevant point that I want to make now is that Kelley offers a long list of fundamentals and essential tenets, and that's his view of what's essential to be an objectivist, and that's fine. I mean, that could be true. My view is that there are different degrees of what's essential in the philosophy. So you have like a base fundamental layer. Like if you don't believe that reality is objective or absolute, then you can't be really an objectivist. You're not even an Aristotelian. So there's certain degrees of being an objectivist, and I would think of them as like degrees of martial arts. Like in karate, you have white belt, yellow belt, orange belt, all the way up to black belt. So if you're a white belt in objectivism, you got to agree with just the most bare bones metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, egoism, capitalism, romantic realism, or whatever art Ayn Rand, explained in her manifesto. Just the general idea. If you have that general idea of what objectivism is and you agree with it, you're probably a white belt. But if you start getting into the nitty gritty of metaphysics and epistemology and ethics, then you start climbing up, the colors of belts, and you eventually, when you know like everything about objectivism and you agree with it, or if you have just tiny little differences, you're probably a black belt.
I'm not sure I like that criteria, because I mean, it sets up a hierarchy where, whatever authority determines what are the criteria you have to be to advance to each belt. At some point you have to see Kant is more responsible for the murders of Stalin's victims than Stalin to be a black belt.
Sure. I mean, you have to understand the finer details and applications to be a black belt. But I wouldn't say you're not an objectivist. I'd say you'd be a perfectly fine objectivist, not knowing all the details. But you're still like you're going to be like a brown belt. You're not going to be a black belt.
But you still get to say, they'll just say to David Kelley, "Oh, you're just a yellow belt objectivist."
Well, then I think that would be a mistake, because he's clearly much higher than that. I would call him a black belt. He's probably
just a different dividing
like
line.
A second or third degree black belt, because he's actually coming up with new theories.
Well, that's objective of you to realize that. But I mean, open and closed ultimately comes into play within who the Ayn Rand Institute declares to be not a real objectivist.
Yeah, because I think basically, we're not going to argue this now, but what it boils down to is I don't think Kelley is repudiating objectivism. I think there's just a confusion going on about what is objectivism, and I don't know.
That's a very benevolent interpretation.
Well, I'd have to talk to Dr. Kelley again. I'd have to ask him these questions. What does
there might be another party to ask some questions to as well.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. What was that?
There might be another party to ask some questions to as well.
Oh, well, I think I already know the ARI side.
Okay. Well, speaking of the ARI side, Onkar's second axis is whether philosophy itself is open or closed. Onkar says it's open and goes on to claim that no one has ever said philosophy is closed.
So there's no claim, and Ayn Rand never made a claim, Dr. Peikoff never made a claim. There's never been a claim around ARI that philosophy is closed.
I'm willing to give Peikoff the benefit of the doubt, but let's go back to his quote from Fact and Value. He says, Kelley states that Ayn Rand's philosophy, though magnificent, is not a closed system. Yes, it is. And then he says, philosophy, as Ayn Rand has observed, deals with only the kinds of issues available to men in any era. Now, you could say he meant philosophical systems, but I could certainly understand how Kelley and others could have taken the interpretation that he was talking about philosophy itself. Now, in the next sentence, he says, every philosophy by the nature of the subject is immutable. So there he does seem to be talking about philosophical theories or philosophical systems, not
Right.
philosophy in general. But that second paragraph by itself almost seems to imply philosophy in general.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the sentence could have been clearer, maybe written a little better, but I think the context shows that what Peikoff meant was that in any era, a particular philosophy can only deal with, the issues of that era. So you wouldn't expect objectivism to have an opinion of, the pandemic crisis we're dealing with right now. I think Ayn Rand had something to say about vaccines and inoculations, but she didn't have the context we have now of COVID. So you wouldn't expect her philosophy to reflect that information. So I think Peikoff is really just talking about a collection of philosophies. He's talking about particular philosophies in general. And so they are closed when the inventors or creators of the philosophy die.
But in that second sentence, I mean, you can see how someone might have interpreted that as he's talking about philosophy. I'm willing to grant the point, and that we're all agreed that the science of philosophy is open.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think what's happening is each side has a little bit of a straw man of the other one's position. I think that it's not because they stop talking to each other. I don't think they have a clear view of each other's, position. And I think some of the wording has not been precise or clear, and which you would expect if you continue the conversation, you'd expect it to get clearer. Each side would understand the other, much better. But since, there's this excommunication going on, they don't have much dialogue now. So it's hard to get each side to understand the other one.
So you're saying it's better to do a quick excommunication without getting all the details, or not so good?
I'm not in favor of stopping to talk to people. I'm not in favor of excommunications. I'm in favor of hashing things out until I at least fully understand the other person's position and they agree that I understand it. And then if I find it hopeless, then I just won't talk to them. Or in the other case, if they start acting rudely or calling me names, and there's no real reason to continue, because why suffer the abuse? You want to deal with rational people who can speak to you, calmly and logically.
And I don't think Kelley, would or me think that this is just an open invitation to allow anyone to talk to you about anything. It's just again, it's there's a different view of what objectivism is, and Kelley is saying he still is an objectivist, and by the criteria he's stating, I think he's correct. But I do want to get to the real rub of this. This is where the third element that Onkar brought up in the open-closed debate.
And the third axis then is in terms of thinking about organizations. And there's the kind of question, is ARI open or closed? And when these issues were really being debated, it was often put that ARI is interested only in preaching to the choir. So you only want to talk to people who already agree with you. And that was the sense in which it's a closed little environment. And to get into that environment, you have to sort of be a card-carrying objectivist. And that's the only person we will talk to. And if you ever step out of line or something like that, we don't want anything to do with you.
Yeah, I happen to think that's a fair charge. I think that they've made against them. I think an organization's leader can shape an organizational attitudes. And even after retiring, such as in the case of Leonard Peikoff, who told those agreeing with Kelley to drop out of the movement. And that type of attitude shapes even the attitude of those that follow him. And
Yeah,
Kelley,
the best argument I've heard for the ARI side is that ARI has standards for who they want to be at ARI. So they want people who agree with their interpretation of objectivism, and they want people who will
oh, the choir.
will work for the benefit of ARI. So that might be debatable whether they should be doing that. There's a question of should membership at ARI be dependent upon agreeing with everything ARI scholars come up with. Is ARI promoting Ayn Rand's philosophy, or are they promoting Leonard Peikoff's interpretation or Onkar Ghate's interpretation? So I think there's an issue ARI needs to solve in that, whose version of objectivism are they promoting?
Right. But I mean, this also goes to whether or not they're open to outreach with other groups in terms of just forming basic coalitions. And while they claim that they are sometimes, at other times, they will say that, it's, no, these groups aren't good enough. You shouldn't go on with Prager. You shouldn't go on with Jordan Peterson. And
in terms of outreach, I tend to agree with the so-called open view. I think that the purpose of a movement is to spread its ideas. So if that's your primary goal, you want to reach out to as many people as possible, and you don't want to limit yourself to people who only agree with certain things you're saying.
absolutely.
And there's also the idea that you can learn, which is something Kelley brings up, is that you can learn from other groups. If you talk to libertarians, maybe somebody in the libertarian movement has come up with a brilliant idea, and then you go and you debate them or you talk to them about it. So
Right.
the outreach, I don't want to not deal with whole groups of people based on their leadership, because there might be people underneath there who are better.
Sure. And I just want to bring up this quote, because David Kelley brings up this same charge in Truth and Toleration. He says, in the name of preserving the purity and integrity of the system, objectivists have too often relied on stereotypical formulations of Ayn Rand's ideas. They've been quick to pounce on thinkers who might have been their allies. They've greeted new extensions of the system with a timid caution that reminds me of the Council of Scholars in Anthem, who spent 50 years debating the wisdom of accepting that radical innovation, the candle. These policies have discouraged independent thinking. They have driven away creative minds.
So here is a slight disagreement, because they haven't driven away all creative minds. Obviously, they've allowed certain innovations, like within Peikoff's theories, or Brook, like whatever Yaron Brook comes up with.
So that the authority that's throwing everyone else out still gets to write his own pieces, and that's an example of their openness.
No, but they have a whole cadre of intellectuals at ARI who are coming up with ideas. Ilan Journo is coming up with foreign policy stuff. So it's not that they're banishing, creative minds. They're banishing creative minds that they don't agree with on fundamental things. So
I think there's more to that, because Onkar, and I just want to present some the whole case that Onkar's making, because this is really about outreach and reaching out. Yes, they may have other guys on staff that they're allowing to publish stuff that Ayn Rand didn't directly say, but let's go to what Onkar says, and then we can build on that.
Are you open to newcomers, to people who disagree with you? Are you interested in having discussions, debates, and so on? And to that, on that axis as well, I would say ARI is open. And if you look at its history in the last 10, 15 years, certainly since I've been here, we've engaged with all kinds of organizations, all kinds of different intellectuals, both more on the public sphere. I mean, just think of recently people like Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers.
I'm not sure they've worked with any of those groups in the last 3 years, but since those are his big examples from last year, I guess we can still expect relations are still good. No, it turns out Yaron isn't even that big of a fan of Dave Rubin or Jordan Peterson anymore.
The issue here, I think, is what is their focus in terms of outreach? It seems like their focus is reaching out to audiences of people who aren't objectivists, which could be, a very valid strategy.
You're saying that what their focus is, or what it should be?
I think there can be more. There can be like a dual focus. On one hand, you want to reach anyone who's unfamiliar with objectivism.
Right. No, I'm saying, is this what's happening, or what you're saying should be happening?
It's to a certain extent, it's happening. They're reaching out to audiences, like they debate socialists and they get to their audience. So they're trying to reach people who aren't really, they're not familiar with objectivism, or they don't like objectivism. They have problems with it. So they want to try to reshape people's opinions of objectivism. But what I'd like to see more of is internal debates, like with the Atlas Society or David Kelley, and hash out this issue of open and closed.
They're not going to. They use them calling, Kelley calling himself an objectivist as an excuse not to talk to them.
I know. I would like to see more. I'd like to see ARI reach out more in terms of, like, Yaron has these debates where he debates socialists. I'd like to see him debate objectivists. I'd like to see him debate serious people like Stephen Hicks, or somebody. Maybe not, Yaron wouldn't be a good fit for Stephen Hicks, but maybe Onkar or Greg Salmieri.
Yeah,
I'd like to
Onkar
see
versus Hicks would be pay-per-view.
I mean, well, you'd think that these events would draw huge crowds of objectivists, and you'd want to see a debate between Onkar and David Kelley or somebody like that.
Yeah. No, I will say, in fairness, I think Valiant wanted to debate Kelley at one point, but it's just like 20 years later, and now, he's hyped up, and, David Kelley's semi-retired, and it's just like, I mean, we can bring Valiant on, but I think, the way Valiant is the way more people at ARI need to be, in a willingness to debate with people that are considered forbidden by the higher ups. I want to offer a little additional evidence against Onkar's claim that ARI is open when it comes to working with others. When asked about working with a CEO like John Mackey, Yaron can't even conceive of what they might work on together.
Is there enough common ground with John Mackey to do something with him? I mean, he does have a huge following.
Sure, but what would we do?
I don't know. I mean, he wants to fight He wants to make the moral case for capitalism.
He doesn't want us to make the moral case for capitalism. He wants to make the moral case for capitalism.
So he does admit Mackey hasn't shown an interest in working with them. Yet Mackey did go on a recent interview with Jennifer Grossman of the Atlas Society I saw, and they were all chummy, talking about how they'd be seeing each other at the then upcoming Freedom Fest. I mean, why is it Mackey's willing to interact without it being a debate with one Ayn Rand objectivist group, but not another?
I don't know exactly, but maybe one group, the Atlas Society, is not challenging Mackey on his view of capitalism, while the other one, ARI, is. So it's just a matter of how they relate to each other on a philosophical level.
So, I mean, doesn't personal matter at all? I mean, just in the terms of strategies for how to promote a philosophy and engage without outsiders?
Sure, personal is always important. I mean, you want, if your goal is to find common ground and work together on the based on the common ground, then you're just gonna focus on being a friend to somebody. But if your goal is to resolve issues or conflicts, then you're gonna take a more contradictory stance, like with a debate.
Yeah, but you can you can have a debate and still work together. The problem is it's possible for people to want to appear to be open, where they'll say, oh, I'm willing to work with outsiders. But then in practice, there's always some philosophical reason why this person's not good enough. This guy doesn't really get capitalism. He doesn't really know what reason is. You can always find something if you're looking for a reason not to work with people or to try to say that no one else is good enough. This isn't just Mackey. In addition to Mackey, Yaron also doesn't know how to work with liberty groups, even like the Cato Institute. And here's that clip.
Right? Everybody says to me all the time, why doesn't Ayn Rand work with Cato? And my answer is, on what? Literally, what's the program on which we would work with Cato? They do their thing, we do our thing. We're not, some things there's overlap, but what would we do together? Intellectual work is not done together. It's just done. And that's what needs to be done.
So he's not even claiming that we should work with others, that it should be done separately.
Yeah, he says that intellectual work is not done together. But if that's true, why do we have panel discussions? Why does Yaron have co-authors for his books? Intellectual work is done together sometimes. It doesn't have to always be a solo passion, Why does the standard for working together have to be intellectual work? Not all work has to be intellectual. ARI does things that are not intellectual, just like giving books to teachers is an example. You can find things to do with groups you have something in common, like promoting Ayn Rand. Like maybe Cato will get on board with just having an Ayn Rand day somewhere.
Those groups like Freedom Fest,
complex thing.
Those groups like Freedom Fest are meant to be kind of less intellectual, just places to gather for people that supposedly love freedom. But even there, Yaron and ARI was there, but they weren't interacting with Jennifer Grossman or Mackey. Also, Prager had a bunch of people there from PragerU, but Yaron said they're no friends of liberty. So, how long until you're left with nothing else but the choir to preach to? And let's also,
you know how in music they have battle of the bands,
right?
Well, why can't we have battle of the philosophers, or battle of the economists? You have some co-sponsored event with Cato and ARI, and maybe throw TAS in there if they get along, and they can all have this battle of philosophers. And
ARI won't deign to debate them. I agree that's a good idea, and it'll be a good sign for the liberty movement when that starts happening. But the context of this is also, this is from someone, Yaron, who said the world was on fire back in 2019, and he can't think of anything to work with others on who care about liberty. So yes, I take issue with Onkar's claim that ARI is open to working with others.
Yeah, it comes down to an orientation or focus. So are you focused on excommunicating people and not talking to people you disagree with? Or are you focused on communicating with people who disagree with you and trying to find some area of common ground where you can start, from and have some conversation with them? And so it's an orientation of rhetoric. It's like, are you anti this person, or are you trying to figure out what they're about and get along with them?
Right. And it also just, even when you are willing to work with people, you can't just have this attitude of, I'm absolutely right. I have nothing to learn from them. I just need to try to peel off some of their people. And then, when that happens, then the people, maybe they don't want to work with you anymore. And then you're just, then all of a sudden Jordan Peterson's not inviting you back and you're stuck complaining about how he's bad and it's terrible that people like him more than us. And, as opposed to just trying to have a good, I've seen Jordan Peterson have these just great conversations with people lately on his podcast. And it's that type of deep bond that I think is the type of thing that makes people see, wow, these are good people. They're interested in ideas. They're not just trying to bash their own way. Let's see what they're all about.
Yeah, one other idea I have is that there seems to be a problem with worrying about your perception. Like a lot of people who are on the closed side of this debate, they tend to worry about sanctioning evil. Like if they go to a libertarian group or they invite some socialists to OCON, they're going to be sanctioning evil. Right. But that's really a concern about how other people will perceive what you're doing. But you can mitigate that by just saying up front you disagree with these people. You're debating them. You're bringing them to your event to debate them. So obviously you're not sanctioning them. You're debating them. Yeah. And if you go to somebody else's forum and you debate them or disagree with them, then obviously you're not sanctioning their ideas. You're just going there to spread your ideas. So it's a matter of focus. It's a matter of, are you trying to spread your ideas, and are you willing to go in the lion's den in order to do that, or are you focused on staying in your own little cavern and trying to shout out of your cave and hope people passing by will hear you?
Yeah, or worrying about who may misperceive what is really capitalism. There's a deeper issue within objectivism of kind of a second place is worse than last place that I've seen. And in the same way, it's like libertarians and Kelley, they're treated worse than socialists in some cases. And it's even a theme within the book of Atlas Shrugged, where you've got Dagny and Hank that are seen as, potentially the greatest destroyers to the people in the Gulch.
Yeah, that would be great if we went to Ayn Rand's novels for more examples.
Yeah, but I just want to go back to Onkar because he finishes by saying there's still more work to be done.
So that's a further perspective, and since there is ongoing debate about this, it's a further of thinking about what objectivism is as a particular philosophical theory, and thinking about what philosophy is as a science. And trying to get more precise and literal what the metaphors of open and closed might be designating or capturing.
The context of this is the Objectivist Academic Center, where Onkar's teaching Rand's ideas. And, he concedes that there's ongoing debate about what objectivism is as a philosophical theory. And even he's still trying to get more precise on what the metaphors open and closed designate. I guess the point to me is, should you really call something closed before you finish defining it as a particular theory?
Since knowledge is hierarchical, you don't have to understand everything about an idea in order to define it broadly. So if all you know is that Ayn Rand had this philosophy, you could say, and she called it objectivism, you can say, well, Ayn Rand's philosophy is objectivism, and that's your definition of what objectivism is. But then when you try to describe it, you need to start, getting into the details. And that's where you might find out that you don't know everything there is to know about what objectivism is, because you haven't studied everything she wrote. But in order to know what it is, here also the issue is, again, are you seeing objectivism as a proper noun or a common noun? Because if you're seeing it as a proper noun, then you can define it without understanding, every little detail. But if you're defining it as a common noun, then in order to understand what the class of objectivist philosophies is, I think you need to have a more detailed idea of what those philosophies entail.
I mean, I get where you're coming from. I just think that can become circular just to be able to say, oh, objectivism is what, is the name of Ayn Rand's philosophy.
Well, I don't think it would be circular since Ayn Rand wrote her philosophy in many different essays and articles. So you can go to those sources to identify what her philosophy was.
But then we're back to figuring out which of what she wrote is the philosophy versus her opinions on a number of issues. This is what it goes back to me. I mean, and I think you've kind of answered this. Is disagreement on such issues then still a rational basis for drumming people out of the movement?
No, I think that it's a sufficiently complex issue to accept that people will have honest disagreements about this. So unless someone is incorrigibly mischaracterizing Rand's philosophy, I don't think it's a valid reason to boot them out of the movement. I think you have to accept that people are going to disagree about what the essence of a complex philosophical system is, because it really takes professional philosophers to, and I'm certainly not a professional philosopher, so I wouldn't even attempt to write a whole book on it. You would take a professional philosopher to figure out, what is the essential structure of objectivism.
And even the professional philosophers haven't done it in a crystal clear way. So I just, I'm all for a single standard, but I do believe objectivists should hold themselves to a slightly higher standard and at least getting along with more rational people. I mean, beyond the official philosophy, the sense of life is about benevolence, seeking the best within people and assuming it's there. I mean, if we think people are basically rational and there don't need to be conflicts among rational people, there's got to be more ideas for working with other liberty-minded people on.
Right. I think that there are plenty of ideas people can come up with. I mean, the battle of philosophers is just one random idea that popped into my head. If people who are paid to think about these things, to think about how to spread objectivism, can't come up with these ideas, then why are we paying them? Why are we donating to ARI and other groups if they can't come up with great ideas? We should just form our own new organization or something.
Fourth branch has been declared.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. I mean, how hard is it to throw together a conference of like-minded people who at least agree that reality is objective? Let's have a reality is objective party. It's like, come on.
Just going back to what you said about, the people at ARI and are they, the best philosophers? I mean, at some point you need the best marketers, and, whether or not they're objectivists, if they're willing to put their personal feelings aside for, to give us good ideas, we just want good ideas where they'll come from. And then it's then the institute itself can still, make sure it's all in line and that the reformulations are in line, or, however you want to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see ARI engage more with people who seriously disagree with them. And I'd like, in general, I'd just like to see more talking across the aisles, just
more engagement with outsiders. I agree fully. I do want to end with this Kelley quote. I think kind of wraps it all up. Objectivism is first and foremost a philosophy. Anyone who subscribes to the philosophy is an objectivist, and anyone who works to realize its intellectual, political, or cultural potential is part of the objectivist movement, regardless of his relationship or personal history with any particular individual or group. Let us abandon the notion of a central authority with the power to define an orthodoxy and expel dissenters. As long as we think in such terms, what we are thinking about is not a movement, but a tribe.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that Peikoff's position again is allegedly based on fundamental differences. So it's it's not like they're tribalists. They're actually presenting some, attempt at reasoning, some logical argument for why they aren't considering Kelley an objectivist.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I
you
do,
can always come up, anytime you want to come up with some sort of reason, you can do it. I mean, we can do another show on that. I just think it's not even just about Kelley. It's about an overall insular attitude that can't even imagine ideas of what to work on other groups with.
yeah, in terms of that, I think Kelley's right that we should abandon the notion of a central authority, because since Rand died and we're now approaching 40 years from her death, the authority is being decentralized. There really is no central authority anymore in objectivism. Each individual objectivist has the potential power to influence others through their choice of association with one objectivist group or the other. So depending on which side you pick or which group you join, that's a vote for which authority you accept. Do you like Kelley's version? Do you like Peikoff's version? Do you like Brook's version? Do you like Ghate's version? And now you've got these podcasts up, so now you can literally give your money to whoever you agree with.
But it doesn't have to be an authority. I mean, this, it can be an attitude of I'm going to be a valuer and I try to get the best I can from each idea. And the only problem, the only stumbling block is when one person tells me, oh, if you try to get value from that person, you're bad.
Yeah, well, I think that if they're wrong in their assessment or evaluation of another objectivist, then their support should dry up, because the more rational minds should point that out. There should be people exposing the dishonest ones and the frauds and all that, and people have to come to their own conclusion on who doesn't agree with the fundamentals, who's being dishonest about their disagreements with Rand, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I didn't see enough people doing it soon enough, so here we are.
Yeah. Well, even you and I, we have our disagreements, but we agree on fundamentals, so we get along. So
That's right. And it's an attitude and not wanting to be a kind of, you can be a moralist without being a moralizer.
right.
And so good. I think we talked about some good stuff today. Maybe we'll get into fact and value. We'll see the kind of responses we get to this. This show partially came about because of some comments about the open closed system from our last show. So we appreciate the feedback. We will probably have a show within the next week or so. And we want to thank everyone for the support we've had. William, any final thoughts?
Just a quick thought that, again, we're approaching 40 years since Rand's death in 1982. So basically, I hope the next generation of objectivists all come together in the name of a great Randian movement and try to either really identify what is meant by open versus closed objectivism, or just drop those metaphors completely and start, thinking of, Kelley's objectivism and then Rand's objectivism. Because I see Kelley's objectivism as coming out of Rand's objectivism.
I just don't see it as that different. He just, if you accept his fundamentals, I don't think you have to call it Kelley's objectivism. I think that concedes too much to the closed side.
I think he's limiting the principles. He's saying these principles are essential to objectivism. And so that to me is, that's sort of
he's too closed for you.
It's a narrower view of what objectivism is.
I don't think that's a fair charge, because it's basically, the closed people saying that they have to be completely, that is what you have to accept. and that they're the ones that have this specific thing that if you go outside of Rand's philosophy, depending on how you define that, then you're out of the game. So I don't think you can make that charge against Kelley without making it again against ARI too. And just the fact of having a specific framework is just it's an attempt at integrity on his part.
Well, I believe one of the essential tenets, Kelley, his first essential tenet is reality as objective, and the concept of objectivity, number 6 in our list, rejecting intrinsicism versus subjectivist dichotomy. So Peikoff's accusing him of rejecting the concept of objectivity and being an intrinsicist or subjectivist. And so,
yeah, he made a bunch of charges. Some of them were emotional in nature.
Yeah, so we have to have a conversation about whether that's correct, whether Peikoff's correct or not. I don't think Peikoff was correct just from basic reading of the material, but that's his charge. So it might be that Peikoff was wrong, but his basis for his excommunication of Kelley, isn't based on just not liking the guy.
Yeah, I mean, there a lot of times we start off with this is Jonathan Haidt that said this. A lot of times people in reality start off with the attitude they want to have, and then they build kind of a whole rational system as to why that's true. I'm not saying that Peikoff did that, but look, the bottom line is that you can't separate this open-closed movement from how open or closed ARI has been about outreach with others, including other objectivist groups.
Yeah, and that's that's part of the package deal Onkar Ghate was talking about. So if we separate the outreach portion, then I tend to side with the open version.
All right. Well, we'll see what kind of feedback we get here, and maybe we'll do a fact and value episode.
That would be great.
Good. Well, thank you, William. This has been the Ayn Rand Fan Club, and we will see you next time.